We are live. Thank you guys for coming tonight. Just a couple housekeeping notes. Scott is planning to be here. He had an appointment at 5:30, but he should be here because there's some things that I'm sure we'll have questions about. And Rachel had a conflict with her kid tonight, so that was my bad in the scheduling of it. Otherwise, she definitely would have been here. But their fingerprints are all over this as well. So I've heard a little bit about how these have gone in the past, and so I just want to start. What we won't do is we will not be going line by line through the funds. There will be an opportunity to do some of that nitty gritty, but the purpose of this meeting is to try to stay high level, taking a look at what's the overall direction of our various funds in 2019, 2020. What are some of the major investments? What are some of the themes of the budget? So I've got a presentation that I'm going to use to kind of prompt us through that. There is a probably an obvious stopping point because I think there's a lot of things to talk about and to cover, particularly once we start getting into our enterprise funds. So I think what we'll do is just start with the presentation. It'll be a lot of me talking and sharing some observations, but I really want it to try to be a dialogue and ask a lot of questions and see where we go. And so that's a long way of setting up that it's likely we may have to have a second workshop depending on the level of questions and the level of detail that we want to get in. But with that, I'm going to go over here so I can hit my buttons. I should have said on the table, hopefully everybody got a copy. Hot off the presses, that is our draft budget document. And I'll just spend like 1 minute kind of going over that. It probably looks a little different than what you've gotten in the past. So we decided this year to take the budget from an Excel spreadsheet and actually use our very powerful BSNA software to do the budget. That's how we did it in my former community. And it actually makes it easier on Rachel when she eventually adopts the budget because it's already in there. So from a formatting standpoint, you'll see there's a couple years of history provided. So those are our actual numbers from 2016, 17, 2017, 18. Our amended budget, which is our budget. There's an activity column that shows you where we are through, that would be today. I think at the heading it says through 6/30/19, but that it's through today. And then a decent amount of the budget process is projecting where we're going to be at the end of this year. And so we've done some of that, and that will help inform some of our budget amendments that council is likely to see prior to the end of the year. And then ultimately the last column is going to be our draft budget that we're really talking about today. You will see throughout there are some blue lines. That is a really neat feature that allows us to add basic comments to a line item. So if there's something that, as we were going through, that we felt was important to note, potentially like if there's an increase from year to year or a decrease, or there's a new something that you're seeing, we've highlighted those things. So I'm just going to grab a copy of that for Scott. I can really get my glasses. Sorry.
So technically, you're at the end of the key.
Yes. Yep. All right. So I gotta get my glasses too. All right. So I mentioned a little bit of this, but basically what I'm going to go through are some of the themes, the investments that we're making, a couple highlights about personnel and operations. There's two major changes to how we are formatting some things in the budget that I'll talk about, and then we get into sort of the revenue expenditure and the overall fund analysis of our 7 major funds. So I'm not going to read this word for word, but I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for the big themes of this budget. So it's really difficult to talk about this budget without talking about our forthcoming project on East Middle and South Mullet Street. This is basically the continuation and conclusion of the project that started in 2017, which we bonded for to do water, sewer, stormwater, and road improvements. So we're picking up where we left off at Fulton.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just slightly past Fulton.
Just past Fulton. It goes down around the bend there to where Mill starts. And then around the corner on Mullet, if anybody's driven on Mullet, it's definitely one of the worst roads in town, and we're bringing a really great improvement to that section of town. There is a $375,000 grant from the state of Michigan that was sort of the impetus for starting this project. But as you'll see, this project, it's a big part of what we're doing this year. Then, we'll talk a little bit about the more minor investments in some of our equipment and facilities. Operationally, the budget is largely status quo, so we're not making any drastic changes to our levels of service, so the residents and community will continue to enjoy the services they have today. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but there's one of our budgetary changes is that we've broken out some of our personnel costs, and you'll see how we think that's going to be a little bit more transparent toward the end. And then, again, as we potentially get to this today or at a future meeting, a lot of discussion about water and sewer funds, recognizing some of the increased costs, some of the deferred maintenance we've had at both of the plants for water and wastewater. And then the last piece is, we talked a lot about this at our goal setting. We spent about the first half hour talking about water fund, sewer fund, and the position that those funds are in from a cash flow standpoint. And so there's a path here to try to begin to reverse that as we go forward. So starting out with the project, I've got a little clicker here that I can, there we go. So this is a total summary of our East Middle and South Mullet Street project. This column here breaks down between the grant, our two streets funds, and water and sewer, the portion of the project. We're looking at about a $700,000 project with a proper 10% contingency, our engineering contract, which council approved a couple months ago with Spicer. We've had some money budgeted this year, and we've had some expenses this year for that engineering to proceed. Everything has been submitted, and we're in the May bidding, I believe. And so when we look forward to the 2019-2020 budget, this is the remainder that we're looking at as far as our project. And so the big question that we've had to outline here is, how does this all get broken down, and where does the money come from for each fund? So the biggest piece here is the Major Streets Fund. And Major Streets has a little bit of fund balance, but a majority of its contribution will have to come from a general fund transfer of $145,000. The Major Streets Fund today annually receives a $55,000 transfer to basically balance the budget in that fund, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. One of the things that we'll see is the general fund has had a history in the last 10 years of basically over a couple years building up and then spending some fund balance down on a project. The last time we had major transfers from general fund to the street funds, you'll see there's two notes there, 2013 and 14, we had 193,000, and then 14-15, just under 190,000. And so it's been a couple years, so for those that haven't been on council in the intervening years, we've had a lot of years of growth in the fund balance. And so we're looking at, from a priority standpoint, infrastructure always seems to be at the top of the list. And so we're taking care of a section of town with some of the fund balance that's accumulated in the last 3 years. It's a little bit easier said in the other funds. Local Streets has the fund balance to afford its portion of the project. Sewer Fund also has that designated within what's called its RRI, and that is a requirement of our 2010 USDA bonds. We have to put so much money away each year, and so the Sewer Fund actually has enough surplus in 2019-20 just in revenue and expenditures to make that. It's about a $68,000 contribution, but that comes from the RRI designation. Yep.
So on the major streets there, under the general fund, that stuff that's been transferred in 13 and 14, and 14 and 15, that was for major street projects that we transferred for that?
They were to street projects. I don't know exactly which ones they were. Scott may remember.
No, church happened after I got on council, and I got on council in 15.
14-15, I believe, was church.
Or so maybe right when we were finishing up,
Yeah.
right at
it's funded
election
the
time.
beginning of that.
Yeah.
13, 14,
When did you have to do like the weird Spalding tear up and all of that over there?
Bismarck,
Bismarck and all of those?
that was with the
I guess my,
rural development project.
the point for my question was, you know, I don't know where, what that transfer's for, and if it was for
Oh, 13,
the major
14 was
streets,
on
because
Putnam.
you just say it was a transfer, I just wanna make sure that, you know,
I-
history is showing that we've done that, is that what we use the money for, you know,
Right.
when
It
the
was-
fund balance
It
gets.
was for road work, but I'd have to check, was it local or major?
The
Yeah.
the 13, 14
It
was
was
probably the
South
category
Putnam.
A work with South Putnam.
Yeah, remember when we had
So
those?
from the industrial
Yep.
park in the center of town.
Okay.
So Corey, another quick question. Where it says requires a contribution of 145, does that include the 55 below?
It does not.
So we're actually 200.
200. Yeah, we're really close to where we were in 13, 14, and 14, 15.
Okay, and 200.
The last piece, the water fund, we still have about 120,000 in bond proceeds remaining from that 2017 bond that we issued for East Middle. And so there's about 80,000 of that will be used for completing that stretch there. So that money's ready and available. And so really when we look at the project, we have you know, a little over 400,000 to fund locally. That's not a number that's usually attractive as far as the bond market to go out and fund it. So the goal has been to try to fund this with existing cash and try to save the interest cost. And so having a piece of that bond still remaining has been helpful to make that happen. And then, you know, the slow improvement of the sewer fund has allowed us to fit that into sewer as well. Any other immediate questions?
What's RRI?
RRI, I should have had that ready. Replace, repair,
Improve.
improve,
Maybe.
that might be. It's a term that comes from the federal government, and they, as part of, when you go out and you get USDA, US Department of Agriculture bonds, they write into your loan agreement that you are gonna save for your next big project. And so we have to put some of that money away, so that's where that comes from. All right, just a couple other brief notes as far as capital goes. In our general fund, we've got a replacement patrol vehicle scheduled along with replacement of patrol vehicle cameras. There's an IT server request replacement, a couple PC replacements, computers. And then in the equipment fund through DPW, just a good reminder that when we went and did the 5-year lease on the Vector truck and the cat loader, we have to budget for that payment for the next 4 years. And then there's a request for a replacement Dodge van for $35,000 and a broom for the John Deere Vector truck at $4,000. From a facility standpoint, this is something that needs a little bit further investigating, but we've had some issues with the City Hall roof this winter, and it's something Scott and I just kind of initially had some conversations about what might need to happen here. But we had some leaking, we had an ice dam that was over the winter. There's some damage that we've been able to see on the inside of the attic system up there. So we've put that in as a placeholder as a potential facility need here at City Hall. And then on the utility system, one of the key carve-outs, I guess you could say, other than the project, is some potential improvements to our Mechanic Street lift station. This is the lift station that was suffered damage during the 2018 flood, and we've been eligible for some FEMA money, which we've run through council. We had that contract, and so the discussion has really been, you know, how can we both repair what was damaged and prevent that from happening again. And so the concept is to bring some of that integral equipment out of the floodplain. And you know, if you have specific questions, Scott, I'm sure can answer some of those as we go along. But those are some of the, you know, there's some big numbers there, but we're not talking, you know, 470,000 like we are on the street project. All right, I'm gonna move to talking just more operations as opposed to capital. So as I mentioned, the budget is largely status quo as far as our service delivery. There's two things I did want to kind of highlight that, you know, for a long time, we've been trying to get our wastewater plant up to the 3 full-time complement, and we've had some turnover, we've had a person leave for a better opportunity in their hometown. We had our wastewater superintendent retire toward the end of last year. So you may remember we had a proposal to do an internal promotion for that position, which we've completed. We had a new kind of number 2 position that we sort of recreated there, and we filled that position, and now we're finally in the process of filling the last position that was vacated, which is our equipment operator assigned to the wastewater plant. And so we're getting close. I hope to having a permanent solution up there and having a lot of cross-training along with our number 2 guy, you know, having an asset management focus, including the water plant as that facility starts to age. And then in our police department, you know, we are now a full-time police department, and both of these things have been in the works a while, but I thought it was worthwhile for council to understand, you know, that we're there. And so there's been a lot of effort over the years to get to those points, and we're there now. The second piece, you know, outside of our in-house on-staff people, is we have a number of contracted services that we've had some discussions about as part of our goal setting. And so for this budget, we're assuming status quo, but keep in mind, we are exploring different avenues with those to find our best long-term situation with some of those services. From a budgetary standpoint, we're at a point right now, as we look to 2020, that all of our collective bargaining agreements have language that any cost of living adjustment is tied to what we provide for non-union employees. So there's not a contract that says X% on January 1st, 2020. That's language that is in both of our AFSCME agreement and our Capital City Labor, which represents our police officers. So the budget has an assumption in there of a 2% increase in January, but as we did last fall and as the city has done consistently over the years, you know, we typically look at what's the CPI or the inflation rate, what's the state saying as far as they have a number, their headly number that they use, and so we would look at those things as we get closer to the fall before making a recommendation. And then the final piece is health insurance. So we were super thrilled last year. Our health insurance rates, I think they decreased by a little under 1%, which was really unusual. It's been a long time since you haven't been hit with at least a single digit, but oftentimes it's been double digit increases. But 10% is I think a pretty conservative estimate. There's over the last 5 to 7 years, health insurance has been somewhat volatile, and we just want to make sure we're budgeting appropriately as we look to the next year. There's a sub-bullet point there that I just want to spend a minute on, which is I think over the last year it hasn't been the health insurance rates that's necessarily had an impact, it's more just choices, right? So if we have an employee that opts out of taking our health insurance and then later joins, that can be a $20,000 swing just based on a choice if you have a family. And so we've had a few of those. We've had some new employees come on that have families, and that's a benefit we offer. But I think it's important to know that, you know, when we come to you with a budget amendment, we had a new employee with 3 kids and a spouse, you know, those decisions have a huge impact when it comes to those line items. And it was something I experienced a little bit in Marlette. When I first got there, we had 3 people that had our health insurance, and by the time I left, we had 10. And so I would continually have this discussion with council that, you know, just by virtue of people making different choices, it has a big impact. And so that's something we just have to keep an eye on as we go forward. Another fun topic is legacy costs. So the city has closed defined benefit pension plan. We still have a couple employees that are still in there, but we no longer offer it to new hires. And then we have a hybrid plan or a defined contribution plan for new hires. For the police, it's basically anybody hired since 2005 is on a defined contribution only plan. In city, or for DPW, I wanna say that cutoff was around 2013, 2014, and then for non-union employees, it was that same time frame. So, you know, over the years, the city's previous administrations and councils made the hard decisions to close those plans. We still have to fund them though, and MERS, Michigan Employers Retirement System, is who operates our retirement program, and we have a minimum contribution that we have to make every year. And one of the things that a lot of cities are struggling with is, over the last, I'd say 6 to 8 years, MERS has changed a lot of the assumptions about their rate of return on the investments. And so maybe they used to assume an 8% rate of return, and it's been dropped down to 7.75, and we're hearing that it's probably gonna get dropped down to 7% as they try to make sure that they're having conservative estimates as well. And so each time those things get dropped, it reduces your funding level, which increases your pension payments. So I think the next effective date of that will be July of 2020. So it's not necessarily something that affects this year's budget, but it's something that we have to be on top of. One thing the city has done is, a couple years ago, MERS had a change, and they offered 2 paths for cities. One was to do what was called a phase-in, where they tried to make the hit not as hard, or you just do the full hit, and the city has done the full hit. So, you know, there's been a track record of trying to stay on top of those legacy costs over the years. The other side of it is retiree healthcare. So today, a new hire, we no longer have retiree healthcare, but we still have some former employees that receive retiree healthcare, as well as some employees that were hired before a certain date that are eligible when their retirement date comes. And so I just think this is important to see. So we had 2 additional retirees last year that are eligible for retiree healthcare until they reach Medicare age, which is 65. And so in a fiscal year, that's about a $19,000 expense. And so it's a benefit that was offered and promised to those employees. And so, you know, we budget for that accordingly. But things like that can have a real impact on our budget as we go forward. The last piece there is that every 2 years, because we offer retiree healthcare, we are required to do an actuarial report. It's around a $5,000 expense, and so that is plugged into this year's budget. It's something we have to do, and we use the same company that MERS uses for the pension side. It's called CBIZ, and so that's what we got there. Any questions on that slide so far?
The only thing I would comment on is that for the retirement and the pension liability, that's also a new requirement for the audit systems through the Treasury, that they're reporting those out and mandating that you set money aside to pay for those.
It is. To Noah's point, about a year to 2 years ago, there was a new law passed that if you don't meet certain minimum thresholds, then you get in a little trouble with the state. You have to have what's called a corrective action plan to show how you're going to get out of that situation. So we're not there. We're I think in pretty good shape on both of those things. You know, but we're not 100% funded, and it's pretty rare to find a community that is. But that's something that, as MERS changes some of those assumptions, that can have a big impact to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars in costs. So it's just something, it's always a thing to keep in the back of your mind. If you read the Lansing State Journal or the Free Press, this is a huge issue across the state, across the country. And so we feel it as well, but maybe on a little bit different scale than maybe a city of Lansing or something like that. All right, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these changes that I referenced. There's really 2 big ones that we're pretty excited about. I think hopefully council's appreciative of it. But the first one is that historically in our departments, we would have 2 line items for personnel. One is salaries and wages, and one is fringe benefits. So fringe benefits included basically anything that wasn't your wages. So retirement, healthcare, HSA contributions, unemployment, Social Security, and Medicare. And our auditors for the last 2 years have kind of been picking at us about breaking that out. And so we've done that with this year's budget. And so from a management standpoint, what I like about it is that it can allow us to better track some of those big ticket items. So over the course of 3 to 4 years, I can see exactly how our health insurance line has trended right in our budget, and that's something council can see. And so I think ultimately it's a little bit more transparent about our personnel costs. We're also able to see that retiree healthcare information, which I think is helpful. The flip side of that is, we went from having 1 line to every department to about 7. So if you notice, your report is 37 pages long. That's because every department now has all of these line items. And I did want to just bring it up for everybody's benefit. So here you can see, salaries and wages, and then historically we just had this 1 line item, fringe benefits, and it encompassed everything. And so today, we break it out, FICA, which is your Social Security, Medicare, unemployment, payments in lieu of taking health insurance, insurance premiums, and so forth. And so you won't see anything in the historic columns, but in the projected, or the budget column, you'll see that we've now broken that up. The second big change, it's a little bit wonky, but I'll try my best to explain it. So one of the hardest things to do when you have your Department of Public Works that works across water, sewer, streets, general fund, is that there's oftentimes uncertainty about where their time's actually going to end up being charged. And so what ends up happening is you budget high in all of those different departments, and then at the end of the year, some might come in a little more, some might come in a little less. You generally have a bit of a trend that you can follow, but it's hard to get budget certainty with that, and that can have a big impact on the trend line of a fund. So we've come up with a system where we're going to allocate that time based on a 3-year rolling average of where time was spent. So if 40% of DPW's time on a 3-year basis was in the sewer fund, you're going to see 40% of salary, wages, and benefits in that fund. So it's something that we would update every year. We would still track that. There's no change to what ultimately the DPW sees on their time cards. It's really a behind-the-scenes process that we do. It's been interesting. This is something that I'm bringing here from my time in Loveland, Ohio. And when I talked to Rachel and Ann, who are more involved in our payroll, they were on board right away. I couldn't believe it. So we think we've got a really good system. We've approved it with the auditor, and we think it's going to give us a really good sense of when we have a budget number, we're going to get really close to that number for each fund. So I've got a table here that attempts to show what I'm talking about. So this is all the funds and all the dollars that represents DPW salary, wages, and benefits. So you've got 2 years of actual, you've got a projection, and then you've got the budget. And so if I just take like the street funds, we're in both funds, it's actually pretty consistent. We're in the low 30s, mid 30s, and then our new formula is right about spot on in the mid 30s. Where you start to see that the hard part about budgeting is we end up kind of budgeting high in most of those departments. And so in reality, these will probably end up coming in right around here, but because there's this uncertainty about where the time's going to eventually be charged, because it's just done on a bi-weekly basis, we have that little bit of additional money that's budgeted. So this is, we think, going to be, at the end of the year, we're going to be really close to these. We make a lot of assumptions, but we've captured all of the things that go into paying a person into these numbers here. There is one aspect of this that proved a little bit problematic. So today, our admin in DPW, which consists of Scott as our director and Scott Holland, the admin assistant, there's a big chunk of their time that's in the general fund. There's none of their time that's in the equipment fund. And so as we were going through this, one of the things that was important to me is that we weren't inadvertently burdening one fund because of this change, where we're splitting those two admin positions the same way as the rest of the crew. And so you'll see here that the equipment fund ends up getting a pretty big hit, whereas the general fund, you know, we're declining quite a bit. And so there's a provision that I put in here where, truthfully, we probably wouldn't do this, but for ease of payroll process, we want to split everybody the same. And so there's a transfer proposed, basically taking the fact that general fund historically has been about 200,000 of our DPW time, and now it's going to go to 160. Equipment fund's generally been around 40,000, and it's going to 65,000. So there's a transfer from the general fund of about 25,000 to try to make up for that fact. I didn't feel like it was appropriate to basically overburden the equipment fund when it was never structured to do that. And so that, you know, if you add that to there, we're kind of getting close to where we've been historically with those numbers.
We use a very similar system to this at the township. I don't know, like every 2 weeks, sit down, do our payroll, and I go through Tuesday, I spent this many hours at the park, and then it all gets brought out of that. My question is, we made a change to that a couple of years ago in how we were tracking it, and we were actually spending way too much time every day trying to figure out, okay, where did we have staff here, and it was mostly when we had our summer help. So I guess what I'm wondering is, when it comes down to your department managers or whatever making this change, how are they tracking it? Is there an additional admin cost for the guys? Okay, how many hours were you at the park? And then you moved over and you were doing this over there, or how are you tracking that?
There should be no change to how
Okay.
the end user. The only change that the actual benefits of this is today. I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, but when we have, let's say, a DPW worker take a vacation day, it goes to one department, and then at the end of the month, Rachel has to do a journal entry to split it based on where the hours were worked. So that's a monthly process she has to do. This does that automatically. So I think we're actually going to see some slight time gains, mostly for Rachel. For Ann, who processes our payroll, it's going to be the same thing. She's going to type it exactly how she did, because we still need all that information so that we can keep updating the study year over year.
You're just heading more towards a CAS compliant computer system. It's all automated based on percentages over registry. Yeah. It's good.
That's the goal, is to make it simpler. My own personal experience with this, I guess I won't tell the whole story, but the bottom line is we went to this because we were having a number of times where budget to actual was just not working like it should have in my time in Ohio. And so we came up with this, auditors approved it, and I kid you not, that first year, our budget number, I mean, we were within a couple $100. Now, I'm not necessarily guaranteeing that here, because there can always be things that happen, particularly if there's a couple major snow events and we didn't forecast overtime appropriately. But it's been a good system. And before we even spent any time on this, you know, it's been a while since I worked there, so I did reach out to them. I said, hey, was that a goofy thing that I thought was going to be great and it ended up being terrible? And they said, nope, we still use it. It's still working really well for us. So I think Rachel also had some insights that I think helped make this a little bit clearer and better for our purposes. I know there's a lot that I'm saying, and it's hard to maybe follow it on the screen. But part of the reason why we're doing this now is to get you thinking, and if there's questions that you're not thinking of today, we can answer them later. Okay, any other questions so far as we go? All right. We're going to look at a couple of the funds here. So I'm going to start with general funds. That's our biggest fund. It funds a lot of different departments and items in the city. So just a quick note on the revenue side, most of the revenue in the general fund is fairly stable from year to year. If you look at some of the actual 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, you're gonna see a lot of consistency across those line items. One of the things that I think is really beneficial for what City of Williamston is, our property tax base has been very stable. We've had a fair amount of new construction. We've had people doing improvements in the backyard. And so our property tax revenue has increased year over year for the last couple of years. That's not the case everywhere in the state. And so I think that's a good indicator of the state of the town. So there is a increase projected for next year. I think we're at a little over 1.5 million in property tax revenue. That's up from about 1.47 or so that were projected for this year. So that's a good thing. There's a piece of this that it gets a little complicated, but a couple years ago, the state of Michigan eliminated personal property tax for large manufacturers and for small employers. There's a complicated system that the state uses to reimburse communities for their losses under that system. I think we're gonna be going on year 4 of that, and to this day, I can't tell you how they come up with those numbers. There was some legislation last year that was supposed to make it a little simpler. What I'll say here in Williamston is we've had so much growth over the years that it's not as big of a deal as it has been in other communities. And so I think one year we got 30,000, another year we got 8,000, but it's been a big difference. We're projecting 10,000, but we could very well get a notice that it's 30,000 again. So it's something that I wish I had a better explanation for you. It's something the Michigan Municipal League has been advocating, trying to come up with a better way for us to forecast these things. But that lingers out there as an unknown. We are supposed to get a second payment in May. So we'll see. I don't know what it's gonna be. There's been no communication. But that lingers out there as, potentially something that can help the general fund even further. On the expenditure side, as you guys study, the printout there, there was just a couple things that I wanted to specifically point out regarding a couple things. So I mentioned earlier that you're gonna see a lot of notes about computer replacements. That is being driven by the fact that we still have a number of workstations that have Windows 7, and Windows will be ending support of Windows 7 in January. So from a computing standpoint, our IT provider recommends that we don't leave any Windows 7 on the network. What that means is if there's some kind of security hole in Windows, Windows isn't going to be sending those automatic updates to patch those things. So you'll see that there might be 5 to 7 computer replacements spread out through a couple different departments. There's also a line item in the assessing department for a potential tax tribunal case. So you guys may remember a couple months ago, we had the Red Cedar Retirement Community Tax Tribunal case, which we settled. We have another one that's pending with Centurion. So Centurion is our second largest taxpayer in the community. They have a wonderful facility. They employ a ton of people in town. Super happy that they're, I think, the beacon of our new side of the industrial park. And but we've got a tax tribunal pending with them. They were acquired by a new company within the last year or two, and so they've started that process. The discussions have been kind of intermediate here over the last couple months, but we are approaching a point where if there's not some movement on a potential stipulation, that both parties would have to submit independent valuation. And so thinking forward of that, put in $8,000 as a placeholder because there's a big value at stake. And so it's a big number, but when you're looking at losing a lot more than that on an annual basis, that's a decision we might have to make. If it comes to that, that will be something we discuss at City Council. And so, but I just wanted you to be aware that that is something that's been lingering. That is our only current tax tribunal case that's hanging out there right now. two other quick things. As I worked on the budget with Scott, it was interesting to learn a little bit about our history with leaf pickup and what we do with the leaves once we get them. So historically, there was a farm that would come and pick up the leaves and haul them off at no cost, and that arrangement ended in the last 2 years. And so we've had to budget money to haul the leaves that we offer as a service to the community. It's not a lot of money in the grand scheme. You're talking a couple $1,000s, but it's a new expense that we didn't have historically. And then the last thing, I always find this fascinating. You know, if you look at our street lighting, we're about 70,000 to light our streets at night, and I just think that's one of those things. It's a service that the general fund pays for. I think most people have no idea, you know, when you add all those up, what that actually costs. So I always, everywhere I've worked, I've always pointed out, because it always perplexes me. It's always such a big line item, you know. But streetlights have an importance for safety and for pedestrians and traffic and different things like that throughout the community. So, yeah. So, to bottom line it, this is a graphic showing our 10-year fund balance history. And I guess I should back up. So fund balance, I've always kind of thought of it like a buoy. So you're either kind of building to it or it's kind of sinking, and why are the reasons that that's happening? So I thought it was interesting to look at this. If you ignore, I don't know exactly, you know, what projects or what was happening from here to here, because that was a fairly large decrease. But you can kind of see there's this trend where we kind of go up, we go down, we go up, and right now we're in this downward cycle. I think a majority of that is explained by our major project that's coming up in the summer here. But you know, we're in a position to be able to do that because we've had some years here where we've accumulated funds. If you look back here, those large transfers I mentioned earlier for the street projects, you can start to see those declines over here. And then we took a couple years off, and now we're back in the cycle of doing another project. So one of the benchmarks that we look at is what percent is your fund balance of your annual expenditures. And so at the end of 1920, if everything happens like we anticipate here and here, we will be at about 37%. Depends on who you ask what appropriate number is. There's guidance from the Government Finance Officers Association that 2 months worth of expenditures is a solid number. That works out to about 16.5%. There's auditors that I've worked with that would tell you 25%, and there's even some that would tell you want it as high as it can be. Your fund balance is really it's a combination of your rainy day fund. It's for those emergency situations, as well as for when you're trying to fund projects with cash as opposed to debt, where you've got the interest cost. So I think that we have a justifiable use of fund balance for some of these one-time expenditures this year, whether it's capital equipment or capital projects. And I think this next slide is really where my focus has been as I look at the trends. So the question that's big and bold there is the general fund structurally balanced? So what I mean by that is, if you take away some of these one-time expenditures, do our revenues surpass our expenditures? If your operations are costing more than your revenues, you're not structurally balanced, and that's something you have to correct. So I put a little bit of notes into here, and we've got, you know, we're spending down $261,000. 145 of that is that additional transfer to major streets. The remaining 116,000, 87,000 of that is some of those capital items: replacement vehicle, server, roof, and cameras in the cars.
So the 55,000 that were shown on the previous slide, is that in the 116 then?
Yes, it would be.
Okay.
Yep. And that's where I wanted to spend just a couple minutes. When we look out a couple of years, there's two big things that the general fund is paying for that are going to end, thankfully. So we have a major county drain assessment that we've been paying for a number of years. It declines a little bit year over year. Just a couple of years ago it was in the 70,000s. Today it's around 60,000. And that's because the interest keeps going down as we pay it off. That ends after this upcoming fiscal year, so we've got 2 more payments to make. That's a $60,000 savings. The other piece is that $55,000 annual transfer that we make from general to major. It supports a bond payment. It was a Lynn Road project, 2003 and 4-ish. That bond, we're done paying in 2021, 2022. So that's gonna free up a decent amount of money in the major streets fund, but it also means that general fund won't have to make that operating subsidy. So between those two, you've got $120,000 that's coming free within the next 2 fiscal years. So I think that's something to keep in mind, especially when I tell you that some of these pension obligations, could be increasing. But I think that it's necessary to know when we start thinking, are we structurally balanced? And so my answer is yes, we are. If we weren't, we would be having a much different conversation. The thing to keep in mind though is, even though we've got some of these one-time expenses, you can't defer your capital forever. I mean, you can't not replace things over time. You can defer for a couple of years, but eventually what you'll start to see is your equipment repair and maintenance starts going up, and we're starting to see that in some other funds. So that is, I think, all I have on general fund from a high level look, and I certainly acknowledge that there may be other questions that come up when you have a chance to look through the draft document. Any other questions on that?
Nice presentation.
Very nice presentation, Corey. This is very
Okay.
different than what we've had in the past,
Yep.
and I appreciate that. And I really like the way you laid out the budget, so we can see those key items, so that if we do have questions later on, we can ask. But it's very easy to understand, so I appreciate that and all the hard work
Yeah.
staff has done.
Yeah. So there's other funds. My goal was to hit general, major, and local. I've got everything else prepared to talk about, but I need some direction. I didn't know how much time we.
So can I ask a couple questions? 'Cause
Sure.
Looking here, the page isn't numbered, Corey, but the first page
It's page
on,
one.
okay.
137.
137.
Yes.
It says mobile home specific tax. Can you explain that line item for me? Because I'm not, I mean,
Yeah.
I know we have a mobile home park, but I'm just looking at, and that is a revenue, correct?
Hit the lights.
It's a revenue, yes.
Okay.
Or somebody.
Um,
Yeah, these are all revenues here,
So,
everything
I
we're
guess-
taking in.
John, I'd have to get back to you on the specific of that. I know at the state level, there's something regarding mobile home taxes. If Rachel was here, she would know
Okay.
it right off the top of her head, but it's a very minor amount, but it's not something that we've, created. I think it comes from the state.
But I guess that's what I'm asking. My question is, that is on top of the property tax for the mobile home park, correct? So that's,
Right.
okay.
It's an
Based on
addition.
It's
the
addition,
number
it's not
of,
just the
Yeah.
tax for just the mobile home park.
No, it's
Okay.
probably in addition to.
I think it's
Okay.
based on number of trailers in the park. I don't know what the table is, but I think that we've had to go count the trailers.
ones down
and the
there.
ones down
Yeah.
there and report them back to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And then I guess on the general fund there, you say there's some relief on the horizon in those payments. Is there any way that that could be paid in advance? Is there any prepayments on that or?
That's a good question.
penalties?
I know for sure the major streets one,
Mhm.
it's likely. You get into what's called calling the bond. I think with only 2 years left, it's unlikely. I could look.
Okay.
On the county drain assessment, I don't know. It may be.
The reason I ask is, if we start looking at our roads and everything around here, we need to go look at monies in the future, and I know that frees it up, but I mean, I don't know. Trying to speed that process up, I guess, or if the funds are available to pay it down and pay it off.
But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Noah and Ken, because you guys have been here longer, we've actually had that come up in conversation before with Rachel, and Rachel will probably suggest not to do that, because if she's pulling, let's say we were to pay off major county drain assessment this year, $60,000, even though we know that we don't have to pay it off until 2021. If we were to pay that off early, so that we could then save money later. If something major comes
Right.
up, then we've exhausted money that we might have had in reserve.
Okay.
That's
So-
fair. And
So I think
That's
she
why
would-
I'm asking, because I just don't know enough about,
Yeah.
but, you know,
Cause she's always gonna wanna safeguard and
Mhm.
have,
oh, absolutely.
you know, money in the bank, so to speak, in case something happens. Because I think that was probably one of my very first questions too, was,
And again,
we've got these
the
bonds
interest we're
sitting out
paying
there.
is not exorbitantly.
Yeah,
yeah.
and we're not gonna get any real benefit if we were calling up saying, hey, we wanna pay it off early, do we get a discount?
Right.
Or can, you know,
Mhm.
that type of thing.
I was
So-
trying to see if I had it, I don't have it on my flash drive, but I wanna say the interest remaining for next year on that county drain, it's like under $2,000. So it's not a huge savings, but,
Right.
yeah. And the other thing that we can't predict is the county drain commission gonna have a new project that hits us with a big assessment, right?
Hopefully.
So,
I have a question, the cable franchise fee,
yes,
so activity through 6:30, it shows only 11,000. I know we've talked to council before about bringing in different cable companies, so we receive a franchise fee from a certain cable company?
From WOW,
From WOW?
we have a agreement with WOW and we get money back from them.
Okay,
And Rachel also had stated that if they're not proprietary, so that doesn't mean that, you know, other cable companies couldn't come in, but it would be at their cost to run, like, let's say Comcast came in, it would be their infrastructure cost to come in, and then, you know, I don't know
They
necessarily
can't
if we.
run on the same line, so they have to go out.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they'd have to all do all new lines, and I don't know necessarily if we get a franchise, you know, payback from them if they
so
came
if someone
in.
got Frontier, we wouldn't.
Yeah, so yeah, basically, if you go all the way back to Horizon Cable, when it was down in where the Barbell Club is at,
Yeah.
there's always been a franchise fee,
Okay.
because Horizon then became, what was it? Millennial, that became Broadway,
Broadway,
yeah,
yeah.
that, so it's always been there.
And we just haven't got our payments for the second half of the year, that's why it's.
there, I believe in that line item, there's some delays. And so what ends up happening is I think we get it even after the end of the fiscal year, but they book it back to this one. So by the time you see the finished activity, it'll probably be right around that 22,000. One thing to keep in mind though, I've seen this in all three places I've worked. Year over year, those fees are going down because people are getting rid of
Yeah.
cable.
Yeah.
They're going to Netflix and Hulu.
Right.
So that has been sort of a lingering concern I've had. You know, it's a $22,000 thing, but probably 4 years ago it was 29,000. So that's something to keep in mind. Like that's why we forecasted that it's going to go down a slight amount again next year. And with the way how that stuff is being delivered to people is changing, we'll see.
Yeah.
Good, thanks.
Yep.
So, you probably don't have this. I guess I'm wondering, that's a different question. WOW is also our major internet provider, so I'm wondering if the franchise fee is only tied to the cable side of that, or if it's tied
That
to
would
the
be a
internet
good
side
question
of
to
it.
find out, because I don't think we've ever asked that, if it's just cable,
Because
or
even with
if
this,
it's internet as
But
well.
the cable's bringing in the Wi-Fi, then you're broadcasting the Wi-Fi, so certain.
It's on the same line, so.
Right.
I guess I'm wondering with the franchise fee going down because they're getting rid
Right.
of cable, but if they still have internet.
What are we getting?
Sure.
Yeah, cause I mean, like, we only use WOW for internet at home.
Right.
We have,
So it-
we have, you know, Dish. And pretty soon it's gonna be Apple TV, and there will be no more Dish. So,
We'll check that. Any other questions on that for now? Alright, I'm gonna
this is so much nicer to
hit
read.
do.
I do have one
Yep.
question. Under the police and kids, didn't Chief, you just say you had a donation?
Yeah,
coming?
that's what I was just looking through, I gotta talk to Rachel why that's not in it. Kiwanis gave us $1,000 for police and kids, and I think, I mean, Rachel could answer it, but, that was not a line item that had been active for several years. And so, but yes, we did get $1,000 from Kiwanis. And there's a National Night
Yeah.
Out too, there was income
It depends when this report was run.
Right.
Because you just did the T-shirts and that like 2 days ago. Or
Yeah, but we got the donation several months ago. But it was within this calendar year, but no, I was just looking at that too, so I'll check on that, but yes, we did.
I was just curious, cause I mean, there was activity on the other ones and there was nothing there, and
Yep.
just wanted to make sure that.
Since everybody's, I think, on that first page.
Let's just hope our check was cashed.
Yeah. This was something I should have had on my screen there. If you look kind of in the middle, interest income, this has been a really delightful thing to see. For a lot of years, interest income, as you know from maybe your personal bank accounts, you might have been getting 0.02%. And as interest income or as interest rates have risen, we've actually seen some real money. I mean, we're at about 29,000 in just interest income based on the money that we have in reserve. If you look back in 2016-17, we were at 4,700. That's a huge
That's nice.
dollar amount. Now, will that continue? We certainly hope so. Part of it is we've had the large treasury to earn interest off of, but you can see we're basically staying flat as far as the projection. But a lot of credit goes to Rachel. She manages all of those accounts, and that was one of the first things I saw as I was looking through this, 8-9 months ago. Is wow, we've had really good returns on interest on our treasury. So.
WCS reimbursements, I'm assuming that's a school.
Yeah, that's the reimbursement we get for crossing guard program,
Oh, okay.
and I believe a little bit of our school resource officer time,
Yes, 10 hours a week.
Pass through cost.
pass through, yep.
Corey, do you know what line item, band shell fees are in? I know there's some discussion about band shell fees.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna tell you to look at licenses and permits. I think it would probably be there.
Oh, top, underneath property tax.
Oh, there it is.
And that may include a lot of different things,
Gotcha.
but we don't get a lot of fees from those, so.
No, because we waive a
Right,
lot,
we waive.
so.
Yeah,
And I mean, I think each case, you have to judge it on its own merit. I mean, I'll be the first to raise my hand that one council meeting last year, I voted no on all 3 people that came in front of us because we have to be able to take money in order to be able to take care of those facilities. So,
I was just saying the McCormick Park donations, if you look, are more than.
that, I think, isn't that though more or less like if somebody wanted to plant a tree down in McCormick Park, like memorial tree, like what's over there for Taylor Smith, and
yep.
we've had a couple other things. We take in donations for people that want to place a memorial or,
Right.
Also, we got the donation to help with that steel roll-up door.
yeah, for
So
the
that's where something
concession.
like that would go.
Which is band shell related, correct?
Well, it's concession stand related. Concession stand can be used even if ban shell's not being used.
I thought the roll-up doors for the band shell.
Or,
Yeah, it's.
oh, it is
the
the
back
ban.
of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of roll up
Yeah.
for the
They
concession
both have
stand.
one.
Yeah, they did.
Right.
Yeah, they did.
Right,
My
okay.
bad. Corey, can you speak a little bit to the economic vitality incentive program that's on the first page?
Yep.
Who are we getting that money from?
That is from the state of Michigan.
Okay.
And that language is actually somewhat obsolete. A couple years ago, might have been 10 years ago now, the state created this different pot of money for what's called revenue sharing. It was
Okay.
called EVIP, Economic Vitality Incentive. That was when they started requiring us to post different things on our website, have information available to the state about, how we spend the taxpayer dollars.
Gotcha.
They went away from that and now they call it CBTRS revenue sharing.
Okay.
And so they relaxed some of those requirements, but we still have to have certain information available on our website in order to qualify for that money.
Is this based on a percentage? Cause I'm seeing where like in 16-17 it was 36,000, it jumped up to, 39.6.
Yep.
But then it comes back down to right around 36, so is it percentage based or population based? I mean, how do they determine how much we get, do you know?
It's based on population unless they do a supplemental appropriation.
Okay,
And so in 17, 18, that's what they did.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll say, we're gonna have an extra $3 million for every city, village, and township in the state.
Okay.
So it looks like that year we might
So
have
they
got
divvied
about
it up
3.
that way. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your general sales?
General
Yeah,
sales,
it's
like
under
above,
miscellaneous.
above
Yeah.
garbage bag
Yeah.
sales?
Mhm.
It's one of the first things they cut.
It is, yeah.
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 Yeah. Would general sales be the, jerseys for the rec program and stuff, or what would that be?
Yeah.
I don't have our BSNA program right here, so I'm not
Okay.
exactly sure.
But you can ask and.
Yep.
I just
Back
noticed
to
that
us.
I just noticed back in
Yeah, it
16,
was a little higher.
17
It
was,
was bigger.
yeah.
I wonder if it's tied to the rec program, and as we keep losing different teams, and they start, providing their own stuff. Because they do, they have to ring up the jerseys and stuff when you
Right.
come in. Because,
Well, I just saw that,
That's
that's just
not-
looking at the dollar amount.
But wouldn't that be all through Meridian if they're selling the jerseys?
Yeah, when I was at Meridian, the administration building in the back, they had big tables with all the jerseys. on.
yeah, but we have some here.
We do
You
sell them
can, you
here.
do,
Oh,
we,
okay.
you
I-
can come in, it's right underneath the front desk, there's a cubby.
Yeah, but I know they had several fold-out tables on over there, so.
Yeah, I bet you that's.
Alright, one more for you, Corey.
Sure.
All zoning related items.
Yep. So that's gonna be your
AGS.
fence permit, your
Yeah.
sign
Okay.
permit,
AGS.
if we have a site plan come in, and then your AGS related fees are gonna be in the one right above that, building, electrical, plumbing, mechanical fees. So, though,
So those are different than licensing and permits then?
yes, yep, that's where, what we talked about just a minute ago, if you're getting a, yeah,
Mhm.
rental, or we have what's called a solicitor's license, that
Mhm.
allows you to
No.
go door to door.
I always recommend you ask if they have that.
Oh, absolutely, they have to have their right.
90% of them don't,
No.
so.
All you have to do is,
Solicitor?
yeah, all you have to do is stop and ask them,
Yeah.
and tell them they're gonna stay home,
Weed ban.
pretty much they leave, they
What?
pretty much
Weed
get
ban.
the weed ban.
We had a meat truck on our street 2 weeks ago.
Oh, with the freezer in the back?
Dakota Meats,
Mhm.
like the off-brand Omaha.
Oh, yeah.
Any other immediate thoughts there? Okay,
This is pretty good.
I'm going to try to mention what I wanted to finish at least today.
Okay.
Just a little bit more on our street funds. I've talked about just about everything that I'm gonna show you here, but for everybody's benefit, the major street fund, the local street fund, gets its revenue from the state of Michigan. So the gas taxes, the license and registration fees, they go to the state, and there's a complicated formula that was authorized by what's called Act 51 that distributes it down to the local level. And so there's been a lot of talk in the news media about the fact that, gas taxes went up a couple years ago. The general fund of the state is putting more money into this. And so if you look historically at that revenue, we have seen some increases. But to tell you what we can do with it, it means we might be able to do one extra road of crack sealing. It's not enough money to even probably pay for the engineering for a project. So it's appreciated, it helps, every little bit helps, right, for our road and street funds. But if you start looking at, where we were 4 or 5 years ago to where we are today, we're up, but it's not substantial. And so I think that as you guys talk to your constituents and people ask you questions, well, I thought the gas taxes and the increased registration fees were supposed to help with this stuff. Show them your trend line from the major streets fund or the local streets fund. Again, I don't want to sound like we're not appreciative of what's been thrown our way. It certainly is, every little bit helps. And then this year, there actually was a one-time appropriation. It was about $45,000 for us, and that has just helped, help fund our future project this summer. So each year, MDOT releases a table that allows you to forecast what that number is going to be. Our number for both major and local is fairly conservative, based on that table. So there's a chance it could be a little higher, particularly if the legislature does another one-time appropriation. They have done that, I think, twice in the last couple of years. On the revenue side in major streets, we've talked about it already, but I just wanna, bring home $55,000 a year from general to major. That's an annual thing we've been doing for a few years now. And that's needed to help that fund make its bond payment. And then we've got the 145, that's gonna allow us to provide the match for the East Middle South Mullet project. From an expenditure standpoint, one thing that I think will probably stand out as you go through is our budget for road salt, which is in operating supplies under winter maintenance, was up a bit this year, and that's gonna be true in major and local streets. And, Scott knows much more about it than me and probably would be happy to talk about it, but the basic gist of it is prices have increased, we also used a lot of it, and we had a shipment toward the end of the season. So you're gonna see, and very, very likely we could have a budget amendment for that. And we've tried to budget somewhat more, for next year as well, just anticipating those prices climbing.
So we have to set our budget number before NDOT gets the bids for the
Right.
salt. And prices were down, and then this last year, prices went up significantly, like 25%. So it blew our budget up before we even started.
Right.
And then winter was slow to get here, but then it hit really, really hard. We were
Yeah.
going through salt really fast.
Yeah.
And so we had to get our second shipment and make choices. And we made choice to get the upper end of the shipment, but then winter stopped.
Right.
So we have a good supply in there right now.
Supply going
So-
into next year.
When you, how are our salt prices dictated? Is that run through the state?
Yeah, we participate in the state program, which
Okay.
means we say, we have to tell them now how much we want to order for next year.
Forecast, right.
For the early and the late fill, there's two different fills you get, and there are two different bids that come in. We have no control over that, but once we make our projections, we're obligated to buy that salt. So we have to do that before.
Because they're
Yeah,
depending
it's
on
no
our,
different
they're
than where
depending
we're
on our
at.
order.
We've had, where we haven't had room for it, and
Right,
They still,
you gotta take
you
it,
gotta take it.
yep.
sure, and if you don't, then there's repercussions, so,
Right.
major.
Then there's times when you can't get it.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
then there's times we can't get it, and we had that here once, and we ended up in the news, so,
yeah, we don't want that to
you
happen.
know.
Thank you, Scott. So bottom line, and this slide is very similar to the next one for local streets. But over the years, both of those funds, they've accumulated some money. Major streets had a big portion in 2017 when we did the project, and we did have a bond as well. But the bottom line is the fund balance in both of those funds, we're using a big chunk of it to accomplish the project. And so similarly to what we talked about in the general fund, with your streets funds, you can run them on a break-even basis, or you can try to build some fund balance so that you can do a cash project every couple of years. And so that's where we're at in the cycle, is getting ready to complete this project. And Scott can talk a little bit about this if you guys want to get into it. But what's going to be really cool is that whole street, all the way from D&W down to Mullet. We're not going to have to worry about that street for a lot of years, right, Scott? I mean, we've got water, sewer, storm, not all of that, but different pieces of it has all been taken care of. And so
So-
it's
I got one question then for Scott. Behind D&W, I know there's a water main issue or something going on with the supply to the building. Is that so?
Oh,
Didn't I see they had to cut into the road surface, all that? Is that anything that had to do with construction through there that would have caused that? you
Wasn't
think,
it
or-
their clean out or something that they had to have done at D&W?
Are you guys talking about on Middle Street? the
Middle
water that
Street,
was
south
there?
side of D&W's building.
That was their service to
Yeah,
the building was
Okay.
leaking.
yeah, it was their problem.
So they,
That was their side of
okay,
things. So they're responsible for the repairs.
okay.
all right. This is almost an identical slide. I tried to talk about them both together. What I wanted to point out here was this fund too receives an annual transfer from the general fund of $60,000 to help the fund subsist. Part of the reason for that is we get a lot less revenue on the local street side than we do on the major street side, and that's based on these formulas that were created in the 1950s. Yet we have just as many lane miles or more,
More.
Scott? So we have more local street lane miles to do plowing, maintenance, crack sealing, and right-of-way maintenance, all the things. And so it's not uncommon, at least in my career, for some other fund to have to help local streets subsist. So, you know, we start talking about where does general fund money go, you know, you've got $115,000 on an annual basis to between major and local streets. That's a big chunk of money, but it does provide our basic routine maintenance and both in the winter and then our regular maintenance. So. Any other questions on the streets? Okay. Equipment fund. We want to keep going for now?
How much more do you think you got, Corey?
Well, we've got equipment, and then we've got water, sewer, and then any wrap up. And, you know, water and sewer are big ones, so.
What do you guys feel like?
I'm good.
Push through it?
Yep.
Okay.
How you doing now?
I'm okay. I'll do it.
Okay, all right.
I mean, but if anybody feels like they've gotta go because of dinner plans or family time, please don't, you know,
All right,
feel obligated.
I'll try to be brief.
Just don't ask a lot of questions.
No. Well, and keep in mind, you know, we'll talk about this at the end.
Yeah, I'll get what writes down here.
All right. So on the equipment fund, just a brief background for those that haven't been here before. The equipment fund is a interdepartmental fund that receives money transfers from other funds. So if we have DPW doing work in the water system, there's a fee that we charge that accounts for the time they use the Vector truck or the pickup truck that goes to the equipment fund. The goal of the equipment fund is to both fund, you know, the time that the guys spend maintaining equipment, as well as the repairs, the maintenance, and then ultimately the replacements. So the fund generates about $230,000 a year. I've already made mention that there's this new interfund transfer from the general fund as a result of this DPW time allocation. It's about $26,000. From an expenditure standpoint, it's just a one-pager as you get to the back of the budget. But just a couple things that we're noticing. Slight increases in gas and oil. You've filled your pump up lately. You know, you've seen those prices start to increase. And then increases in repair and maintenance. As Scott and I were talking about it, you know, we've put in the everything to get the new Vector truck. We've had a couple major repairs on the existing one until that one comes. You know, so you're starting to see that as that piece of equipment ages. And then we've got our annual payments that are plugged in for the next 4 years. So with some of the equipment that we talked about earlier, we're projected to spend down about $48,000, which would leave us with a cash and investment balance of $228,000 at the end of 2019-20. Feel pretty good about that number. I think that leaves a lot of room for an emergency repair, replacement, but also, you know, Scott does a great job with his guys of managing the fleet, and they have a very detailed spreadsheet that they use to kind of track the condition, when they think certain replacements would be coming. This year has been this coming year has been, I think, fairly light year with just those couple items contemplated, but you know, there's a lot of equipment out here, and so.
Yeah, and we've run this fan into the ground. It's actually got holes in the bed where we're trying to put stuff in there. You gotta be careful your feet will go through, so it's time.
Just a real quick question. I know in the past that we allocated use to our local entities such as Webinar and that. Have we had to do that a lot in the last years where we get reimbursed for use of backhoes or other things that we've done?
What we've done is more so reciprocal type stuff, like the city of Mason.
You trade, I trade.
Yes. So Mason has used us for a backup when their Vector's in. We use them for backup when our Vector's in for work. Mason's borrowed our big pump on a trailer a few times. Weberville hasn't happened as much lately, but we did use, I think, a bucket truck or something that they got.
There's one thing here that Scott and I talked about, is they've got a wood chipper that's kind of borderline. on needing a replacement. It's about $60,000 expense. You'll notice it's not contemplated in here, but one of the things that we still don't know is when we get the new Vector and the old Vector becomes asset we can dispose of, that has some value. And so just keep that in mind, you know, depending on what that comes in at, that may shift something into this fiscal year. Obviously, can't do any of that without discussion at the council level. But I just wanted to kind of plant the seed that.
Isn't that a subcontracted service that we're using now for the tree service guys? Plus the wood chipper?
No,
No,
They're different.
This is for,
so
we do brush
the wood
pickup.
chipper
Okay.
is,
No,
yeah,
that's
we do
fine.
brush pickup and we haul it
Okay.
around with one of the plow trucks with the big bed. And then they, throw the
Okay,
stuff in it.
but I know the tree service guys have theirs and they do theirs.
So with the asset, whatever happened, I know we used a third party for auction for the loader, correct?
Yep, we got about 40,750.
Okay. Do we have a idea what the back truck is worth?
Probably in that same range.
Okay. So that's a good chunk if you had
It's a good
a wood
chunk of
chipper and,
And the chipper, he mentioned 60,000, yes, and then the current value of our existing chipper that's
Right.
15 years old, we have a quote on that as a trade-in of over 11,000
okay.
There you go.
in its current condition.
Right,
If we choose to wait, that's gonna be
right,
Right.
exactly.
less. And we're, in this, we would be downsizing the chipper one size. We currently have an 18-inch opening,
right.
and we think that we can do with the 15-inch opening, and that would save us some money and not be much different on the use.
And you can limit the size you're picking up anyway, so that's the
It's-
reason
We're
for
supposed to only use
downsizing.
18 or 8 inches,
Right,
but people do exceed that sometimes, but the 15 still gives us almost
Yeah.
double the capacity.
All right, now our favorite two funds, sewer and water. So here we get to talk a lot about our plants, we get to talk about some issues, and we get to talk about rates. So you will see that we have attempted to build this budget for the sewer fund without a rate increase in 2019-20. That's been informed by three things. So first of all, the fund having paid off its last big bond last year, you know, it has put that fund in a better position, and I'll get into more of that. The second piece of that is, it's gonna be a different story on the water side. But people think of their bills as one bill, right? And then the third piece of that is, council approved the wastewater treatment master plan, which Tetra Tech has been working on, along with Scott and Steve David, our wastewater treatment plant superintendent. And the results of that are expected this year. And so that plan is gonna inform a lot of the next couple years with at the plant within the sewer system. And so we've attempted to, you know, recognize the fact that those things are coming later, as we go forward. So just two other quick things. We've assumed that there's not any major changes in the number of users or usage. I think those are fair assumptions, but you can see major changes in usage from year to year. But we've been pretty consistent, at least in the years that I've looked at, just in the last 2 to 3. The last piece of this is you're gonna see a new line item, or at least a new note, for surcharge revenue. So I think council is fairly aware that we've been experiencing some issues at the wastewater plant due to high-strength brewery wastewater. And so we've been working with them for a while. Council's been involved when we had some extra sludge hauls, just before I got here. The bottom line is that they've got a plan to take that burden off of the wastewater plant, but until that happens, we're seeing increases in our operating supplies, our treatment chemicals, and our contracted services. We're gonna have a third sludge haul this year, just like we did last year. And so the surcharges are an attempt to offset those costs. And so we've had those conversations with the brewery. I think there's a understanding on both sides that everybody wants the best, they wanna fix it. You know, but in some ways, it's just, they've grown really fast. And so, I think we're in a good spot trying to work with them on those things. So that comment is gonna come into play as we discuss the expenditure side. In fact, I'll just segue into the last bullet point, which is the plant. And so you're gonna see both in this fiscal year and next fiscal year, we've had to make some assumptions about increased costs in all of those line items. So hands down, you're gonna see a budget amendment. The hope is that those surcharges offset that so that we're not establishing rates based on this one industrial type user. Going back to the beginning, we had a discussion on Monday night about transitioning to monthly billing. And so it's not a huge line item, but I wanted you to be aware that we have budgeted for the increased postage costs. It's $1,800 difference in both the water and sewer fund. We've continued the replacement schedule for meters. There's 33,000 budgeted for water and sewer. We split that cost evenly. And then the last piece, I'm gonna lean on Scott a little bit. We've had a lot of discussions, and he keeps kind of planting the seeds about these lift stations. We have a number of lift stations, a number of them are aging. I've listed a few of them there. But we've increased the equipment repair and maintenance line item in that fund to try to acknowledge the fact that we're having some issues with these lift stations, that, it's not uncommon to see a $4,000 to $5,000 bill for some of these replacements. The second piece of that is, I mentioned it earlier, but we've created a line item for some capital improvements to the Mechanic Street lift station. The reason we did that is because it's a little different than just a repair. Like, we're actually trying to upgrade that and bring it out of the floodplain. So Scott, would you just say a little bit of words about
Sure.
state of lift stations?
Well, the Mechanic Street lift station and the High Street lift station are both canned ones. You'll see that there's like a round cylinder with a top to it. That means that there's a ladder, you go down inside, there's a big chamber 20 feet below grade. That's not the kind that we would install these days, but they were done in the 1980s. They still have usable life. They're nearing the end of their technical usable life, but they're in good enough condition because we've kept good care of them that we think we can squeeze some more out of them. But it does mean that there's some increased costs that we have to do for some of that. Now, Mechanic it was put in the floodplain, and based on the flooding last year, we could see it wasn't even to the 100-year floodplain, and the electrical panels, the SCADA panels, all that stuff, we were very close to losing them last year. So in raising the can top, it's getting it up out of the floodplain. You'll see that it's 3 feet higher now, 3.5 feet higher than what it used to be. We're gonna build a platform around that, get the electrical panel, the SCADA panel up there so that it's out of the floodplain, and we can get many more years out of that lift station. That is actually the third lift station in that spot in the history of the sewer system. So those lift stations usually last about 25 years. So, something's gonna have to be done with it in the future. Zimmer is in really, really, really bad shape. That one's gonna have to have a major rebuild or replacement soon. We anticipate that we're gonna incorporate that with whatever plant upgrades are gonna happen, because I think we're talking 6 figures at that lift station. Okay? It's a steel station as well. We've done some moderate repairs to it, but everything is antiquated and old in the thing. We did as much as we could to the top of that to keep it so that if somebody stands on it, they don't fall through.
Where is that one located?
That's over by, Spags, across the street from Spags there.
Yep.
Whole condo association,
Yep.
not sewer systems.
East End lift station, I think you're referring to transfer station? Okay. Yeah, transfer station is an older vintage. It needs to have some of the electronic stuff in the panel replaced. The motor controls and things like that are old, and we don't have exact costs on that. So what we've tried to do is balance what we think we're gonna run into this year with what can be rolled into that future project that we're anticipating. To not get into an emergency situation, but spend appropriately. Does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.
Hideaway Woods, what do we?
Hideaway Woods, that's got a dialer system in there that is being antiquated by the change in the Verizon network. So that has to be replaced, or it's a fairly new station that was installed just at the onset of the Great Recession, but it didn't get used until just recently. So The problem is, when they installed that thing, they didn't have it tied into our SCADA system, so it's not tied into the SCADA system. With the Brookstone development, we're telling them you need to do some upgrades to that station. If that Brookstone development doesn't happen, we're gonna have to do that stuff because of the antiquated,
Is that the force main that comes in on Quinlan then?
yep.
Okay.
And they, in order for them to do that project, they're gonna have to replace the force main completely. So,
Is that directional, or is that gonna be road work and stuff going?
it'll be mostly directional.
Okay.
They've looked at, basically splitting and pulling through the old force
Like
main.
pipe
new force
bursting,
main,
yeah.
with pipe bursting, but the cost of that is actually a little bit more than just putting a new one beside it.
Okay. I know there's the paving on Glen Eder, that's why I was
But
asking.
until that development moves forward, we can't be guaranteed that it's gonna happen, so we're just kinda earmarking some funds. It's not big, it's less than $1,500 if we have to replace the diode unit out there.
All right. So briefly, this is gonna sound a little bit like what I talked about in December, but one of the things that we have to get to in this fund is generating enough money to meet our USDA RRI obligations. It's about 80,000. So in a given year, revenue has to exceed expenditures by 80,000. You can use that 80,000 to fund RRI stuff, which is basically anything to improve our system. And that's what we're proposing this year with this east, middle, south mullet. The portion of that in the sewer fund is around 68,000, so that will come from that. So we're basically telling you, we're meeting our obligation this year. We're gonna have a little bit of a surplus to try to start getting us out of that negative cash flow situation. So it's not gonna happen in a year, but we're getting there, and the light is starting to look a little better here. Okay, lastly, the water fund. So we are proposing some rate adjustments in the water fund on both the readiness to serve and the commodity charge. So what I've showed you here is the readiness to serve on a bi-monthly basis and a monthly basis. So on a bi-monthly basis, we're proposing it would be $9.12 every 2 months. On a monthly basis, it would be $4.56 a month, which I think comes out to about a $54 a year increase. On the commodity side, it's a 15-cent increase per 1,000 gallons, so it'd go from $3.79 to $3.94. I believe this next picture is going to show you what that accomplishes for us. So the colors aren't great, I apologize, but essentially what this graphs is your RTS revenue against your fixed costs. And this is based on a rate study that we had done a couple years ago by and we basically just modeled that to provide this drawing. So your RTS charges are supposed to cover your fixed costs. Today they don't. You can see that the costs are more than the charge. When you jump to this year with this $4.56 a month increase in the RTS, we've got we're above our fixed costs, and that generates the surplus we need for the RRI, which is about $49,000. On the commodity charge, you try to match your commodity charge to your variable expenses. And so you can see here, that's basically what we're showing. Now there's a bunch of assumptions in all these out years, but the key was in these this 2 year period here, can we do something to get this back in line? So that is the goal with that rate adjustment. I'm just going to talk briefly on the expenditure side. Some of the things that we've got in here. Same thing, postage is included for the monthly billing process, the water meter replacements, and then we've had a couple things in the plant and wells department. We've seen some increases in our treatment chemicals, the brine salt and the phosphate prices. We've mentioned at council meetings and also in my reports this issue we've been having with the force main at the water treatment plant. Scott and the guys, they've got a plan. They've been doing some work on that in the last 2 weeks. But what we've seen is as that pump runs every day, our electric costs have gone up. And so you'll see in this year's budget, we've had to bump that. Hopefully, the solution that they've got in mind is gonna work, and that will correct itself for next year, but it's worth bringing up here. Something that was really interesting to me, being new, is that the plant, you know, it was opened in
2012,
2012.
March 2012.
And so the equipment repair and maintenance line item, you know, we might have spent a couple thousand here, and then every year as it's aged, it's gone up a little bit, and I think that's not a surprise. As something gets older, it's 8 years old, going on 9, that we're starting to see some of those costs increase. The force main issue is a good example. And then the last thing, I'm gonna ask Scott to talk about this, is that we have these mandatory tests we have to do through DEQ, and all of them are due this summer, is that?
Everything we ever have to do is all due this year. On top of it, the DEQ has increased testing requirements from here on out for us. We now have to do twice a month water quality testing that we've never had to do before. That's gonna be an increased cost to us, starting in the summer. And then we also have to redo the entire lead testing program. So that's extra cost. We also have to go through all of the radium testing on the entire system this year, which is once every 6 years now we have to do that. So it's the magic year that everything hits.
So when you say that DEQ is requiring us to do it twice a month now, is that mandated across the state, or are they just
No, well,
checking on us?
it's mandated according to the type of facility that you have.
Okay,
So because of the type of facility that we have,
okay,
we are now under new requirements.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
of what happened in Flint.
correct,
To have certain parameters checked twice a month
okay,
from here on out.
okay.
So what does that increase our cost to, roughly?
Well, we're planning a good $7,000 this year for testing. Now those radium tests are expensive. They're sometimes $100 or more a piece.
But you're budgeting $7,000 for all of the new testing. This $7,000 will include the increase in the monthly testing and everything?
This year, it was 7, and we bumped that to 10 for
Okay,
next year,
okay.
so, yeah.
All right,
But
Now, the following year, it should go back down again, because we'll be, some of these
On
things
and
you have to do
off year.
every 3 years, some you do every 6 years,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So that, as you look at the history on it, it goes up and down a little bit depending on
Okay.
how they.
Okay, so just like we did on the sewer side, this is sort of your overall picture. These numbers assume those rate increases. So we have to generate this surplus of 49,100, and what we're saying is before we account for our big project, we're projecting 71,735. Now that said, the project is being funded through the bond proceeds that we still have. And so one of the big goals in making this recommendation was to try to get us out of this. So this is our year-ending unrestricted cash balances. You know, we talked about this in December, and we're trying to get out of that situation. It's a very complicated array of analysis because we have so much cash, but it's all restricted based on bonds we have, and including the bond proceeds that we're gonna use for the project. And so what we're trying to do is generate enough of a little surplus to start getting out of that situation and fulfilling our RI requirements. So this is, you know, what the trend line shows, but you can see even with what we're talking about here, you know, it's still gonna take some time. I think the other thing to keep in mind here is this is all built for today's debt, today's services. And so this does not include the bigger picture stuff out in the system, right? The water main replacements. And so it's a really heavy discussion when you start talking about, you know, what's out there, the needs, you know, but in the very near term, what this is attempting to do is to get us in a spot where we've got that surplus being generated year over year to fulfill that 49,100, and then to have a little bit more to get us out of this this negative cash balance.
Right, the RRI was calculated by the USDA based on the improvements that were done on the water system and the sewer system in that 2011 project, only for the value of that work that was being done. It didn't take into account the total value of our water distribution system, and it didn't take into account the total value of our sewer collection system as well as the existing sewer plant that was there. So the RRI is this obligation have because of that loan that we got, but it's not necessarily enough to fix all the problems that are out there.
Right.
It's a help, it's a big help.
So, that is my presentation. I did put up here some general next steps. Obviously, you're just now getting the full printout. You've gotten sort of the verbal message about the budget. And so I wasn't sure exactly if we would have got through all this tonight, but I also know that as soon as you leave here, you're gonna be thinking of other questions, you're gonna be looking through this. And so I wanna kind of keep it open to what to do next, as far as if we need another workshop to have more of a detailed discussion. We don't have to answer that tonight, we've got some time. But we do have some obligations as far as we have to have a budget public hearing, we have to advertise it, and we ultimately have to adopt the budget by June 10th. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there in the month of May. This is one potential pathway, but you could set the hearing for May 27th, or you could set the hearing on May 13th or May 27th, have the hearing and then potentially adopt it June 10th. So there's some wiggle room depending on the level of questions, potential changes, ideas.
I guess my suggestion to council would be is if you get into this and you're reviewing it and you have questions, send the questions to Corey. If he starts to feel that he needs to pull us again to answer those questions to the group, or if he can send out emails because they're simple questions. But if you start getting an onslaught of questions, then maybe that would be your determining factor that we need to come back together again for another workshop, just so that we can have that open forum to talk through the questions. But if they're not extremely complicated questions, and you can send out the question and then your answer to the group, maybe that's the way to proceed so that we can try to hit those targeted dates.
And I'd also be happy to meet with anybody
Yeah.
individually or in a small group, as long as we're not violating any quorum issues.
Right.
Really, if I bottom line it, the biggest things to me are, there's a big general fund transfer to do the project, right? That's a big number, and it's been about 5 years since we've done something like that. So as I was developing this, that's what caused me the most, heartache as I'm trying to figure out how do we fund all these things and make it happen. I think what ultimately won out in my own deliberations and talking to staff is, we talk a lot about infrastructure being important. We've been able to build the fund balance. Even after the project, we've still got above what the standard recommendation is for your fund balance. We just need to be sure that we're gonna have a path to start building it up again, for the next big expense that comes down the horizon. And then secondly is the water fund, right? I recognize, we're talking, it's $4.56 a month. That has different meaning to different families in the community. And then the 15 cents on the commodity charge. But I think ultimately, as staff, we have to present a way to start getting that fund back to where it needs to be. Keep in mind, we did not do any rate adjustments in 18-19. I don't remember exactly what was done in 17-18, but I know, I think it might have been.
Wasn't it like 2.5% across, or 1.5% across the board? It wasn't a huge increase.
Right, and it might have just been, I think, on the water side. I can get that information, for sure. But
So I guess one thing that bothers me is realizing how much we spend on street lighting and things like that, and then the amount we're transferring. Is there any way, or has anybody looked at renewable energy to fund or run some of that? I mean, I know we have the water treatment facility out there. I know there's not a lot of trees, but I don't know, solar energy, things like that, if there's grants or something available. I mean, it's a lot of money.
it's a good question, John. I think probably a little more doubtful on the street lights.
Right.
But are there methods that places have used for their facilities.
Correct. Just
I've-
for-
Yeah, yeah,
know,
you know,
You said the water running the pump is costing more, I'm just,
Well, you could go green here, get your roof fixed and put solar on top.
yeah. There's obviously, there's an expense to put those systems in. I have a good city manager friend in Ohio, they just moved into a new city hall and they put geothermal in, you know, to run their thing, run their city hall, so. I'm not suggesting that, I'm just saying, like, that there are some precedents out there, but we didn't do that research, you know, as part of this.
I'm just sitting here thinking about it, you know, just, that's a huge
Yeah.
number to.
Yeah, it is, it is.
Thank you, Cory. Yes, Dan.
I know we have to meet the RRI with the water fund. We need, you know, living on William Street, and every couple of months we get the red water coming through the pipe, and you know, every time we hike the rates, it's gonna be, why am I paying more for water that stains my whites? And, you know, we just have to be ready for those questions.
Scott, I saw that we've got the dates for hydrant flushing. Are we doing that less this year? It's just the 3 times that we do
We
it?
do it 3 times.
Okay, alright, seems like that's less
And,
than
you know,
what we've done
we
in
do
the
it in the
past.
spring,
Okay, spring,
in
summer,
April, we do it
okay.
in July, and we do
Okay.
it again in October.
Okay,
Certain areas, we will sometimes go and easily leak water out of a hydrant to try and freshen the water in that area. Williams is one of them sometimes, and then the other one is, by the corner of Bismarck and
yeah,
so.
okay.
Is that dead end there or no? Or just a,
No.
just
it's
restricted?
Four
Okay.
mains in the area. William Street, there's a 1995 water main going up Love, going up Williams, not Williams,
With,
Wint. And McCormick has a 1995 on it, and it's a 4-inch old cast iron running the length of Williams.
Yeah.
So,
So what's under?
well, and I think that's a meeting for another time to figure out
cast iron.
what we're gonna do with this infrastructure issue.
That's doing fine, I just got a little filter system off the main.
I should mention, we did not talk about the DDA fund or the TIFA
Right.
B2B. That will be discussed with those boards,
Mm-hmm.
just for everybody's, I guess, benefit. They're in your packet, but, the DDA fund's doing pretty well. I think the 304 Rivers Edge building, a lot of the capture of that has helped that fund. And so, you know, they're still planning on the parking lot project that's back behind Red Cedar Grill and the hardware store. But we'll continue those conversations with DDA. And then in the TIFA fund, you know, we've been somewhat stagnant this last year. Part of it's staff capacity, part of it is we've got a bunch of CPAs on the TIFA board that has all been busy these last couple months. But we will be meeting next week, mostly just because we haven't met in quite a while. But, you know, the TIFA has been a really great thing as far as our DPW facility out there in some of the areas in the industrial park. And so it is a viable board we have that has resources, so it just needs some attention, but as council's well aware, there's a lot of things that need attention, so. But those two are in your budget printout.
Did we ever get your big storage barn out there? I know there was some rain over and all that. Repaired and everything.
That's a salt dome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that got
That's
taken care
gonna
of.
happen this year.
Yeah. we wanted to
So
do
we
that.
always look at.
It's gonna run through the city, but the cost is being covered by.
I understand, but we repair that, it's not.
Corey, can you send this PowerPoint to us?
Yeah.
Just so that,
Sure.
I mean, it was great,
prompts questions.
but it prompts questions. Yay, thank you, Corey.
Thank
And
you.
please thank your staff.
Yeah, it's one thing I'll say is, you know, I think next year, we'll get you the printout ahead of the meeting. You know, I think in the past, you probably went more like line by line. But it's been a process, you know, getting through this, and but you've got the draft, and look forward to chatting more.
Excellent. All right,
Okay, Thank you.
Thank you.